Hello, everyone. My name is Zach, and this is Science Explosion at Hudson Public Library in Hudson, Iowa. All right, so thank you everyone so much for joining me today. Today, we are going to be making a delicious treat. That is right, we are making cake today. So, we're making a special variety of cake, and that is a mug cake. So if you've never made one of these before, then I am glad to introduce you to how to make them, because if you like cake but want it to be a little bit easier and in a nice little personal size, then this is a great one. But throughout this, we're going to be talking all about the science of cake. All right, so if you want to follow along, which I encourage you to do, then you will need to have all the ingredients to make cake. And so you're going to need, and I'll list them out real quick here, but then I'll go into more detail of them later. You're going to need some flour. You're going to need some sugar. You're going to need some oil. You will need some salt, some baking powder, and then some water. And then there's a couple optional things that you can put in this. So you can put in chocolate chips if you like. You can put in an aromatic like vanilla if you like. And you could put in some dairy if you like into this, or some milk. And you could also put in an egg. And I will be talking about what each of those optional things does as I go through this too. I'm doing a couple of those in this, and a couple of them I'm not. And then lastly, you will need a mug. So I actually recommend don't get a mug that is short and wide, because your cake is going to rise. And if it rises too much, it could go over the edge. So you want one that's at least decently tall. So this one holds quite a bit. It's a little bit larger than a standard mug. And so I think it's going to work really well. If you're curious, by the way, what my mug says, it's Mobius. And that is the service that is linking together libraries for interlibrary loan. So, by the way, if you didn't know, if you're a city patron or a rural resident, you can always ask us to interlibrary loan something for you. So it's a great way to expand all the materials, even if we don't have it. So, all right, that is enough self-promoting. I think we can get right into this. All right, so make sure you wash your hands. I washed my hands right before I did this. That's always a good thing to do whenever you are cooking, even if it's just for yourself. All right, so also I didn't mention you need a microwave. If you're making a mug cake, then you'll want to have a microwave. All right, so you'll get your mug. Then you need 4 level tablespoons of flour. So I'm just using plain white flour. That's what most cake recipes are going to call for, but you can use other kinds of flour. So do you know the difference between white flour and whole wheat flour? All right, so if you've watched a video, I think, what was it? A couple weeks ago, I did a video where I talked about what flour actually is. And so flour is the seeds from different grasses. Wheat is just one variety of that, and that's usually what they make into the flour you get at grocery stores. All right, so a whole wheat flour is basically when they take that whole seed and grind it up. Well, white flour is when they take only part of that seed. They separate out the hull, which is kind of the part with a lot more of the fiber in it, and take it away. So it's interesting because most of the nutrients actually are going to be in that part. So when you take that away, there's a lot fewer nutrients in white flour than there is in whole wheat flour. But there's something else interesting about white flour. If you notice that it says on here, let's see, this word right here, enriched. So enriched is a word that means that they, by the way that they processed it, it took nutrients out, and enriched means that they put them back in. So it's sort of like if you were to take all of the nutritious foods out of your diets, like the fruits and vegetables, and then substituted a vitamin. That's kind of what happens. So that's actually a big reason why they say not to have too much white flour. Whole wheat is going to be a lot better for you. It's got where most of the nutrients are in the flour, and it's got the fiber in it. But anyway, this is a dessert, so we are going to do, and I think I did yes, tablespoons. So make sure you're always reading whether it says tablespoons or teaspoons. So you're going to do 4 of these, 2, 3, 4. And when it says level, you want to level it off so it's flat over there. You don't want a heaping one. So remember, I always think this is important to say when you're cooking. Cooking is chemistry. So you are always doing science and you're doing chemistry whenever you're cooking. And if you love to bake, then you are a chemist, and embrace that, because that's where you can get creative with it. All right, so then we need 2 tablespoons of granulated sugar. Now, if you have any other kinds of sugar, then that'll work too. If you have cane sugar or beet sugar or whatever you have. I don't have any beet sugar. I've never actually tried just pure beet sugar. I've tried the syrup, but anyway. So, sugar. Do you know what that is made out of? So I'm going to get this scoop here. So 2 level tablespoons. All right, so sugar is something that's in a lot of different foods. So plants, and even in smaller amounts in animals, there is a certain level of sugar. But what this is refined sugar. So a lot of plants are actually very high in sugar. So if you eat something sweet, sugar has a sweet taste. So when you bite into an apple, that is a sugar, but it's a complex sugar. That means it's a sugar that's basically attached to a lot of different things inside of that apple. It's got carbs in it, it's got fiber, it's got things that make it so it digests slower in your system than this. This is refined sugar. So basically what they do is they take a plant, usually sugarcane, and then they take that plant and they process it. So basically they get the sugar extracted, so they take it out of that plant, and then when they've got that sugar taken out of the plant, they refine it more. And they basically just distill it into this concentrated form of sugar. So actually, when you eat this type of sugar, it's very different from when you eat the sugar of an apple. So this type of sugar goes into you and gets absorbed right into your bloodstream right away. And it actually causes you to store it a lot quicker in your body. That's why if you, this kind of sugar, if you eat too much of it, will cause you to gain too much weight, and it has some health things. So I know so far what I've talked about for this dessert doesn't sound very good. So desserts are not the healthiest things like cakes. It depends on what you're having for dessert. But so this is refined sugar. So you should try to not have too much refined sugar in your diet, but we're going to be having a little bit today. But remember, sugar is sweet, and it is a natural part of different things. It's just when we take it out of something and refine it, if we have too much of that, that's where the danger lies. So it's pretty hard to eat too much just straight up fruit. Now I say fruit, but there's something that's very different, and that's fruit juice. Fruit juice is about the same as just having refined sugar because it's not attached to the fiber or anything else that's in there. The fiber is what really slows it down from being absorbed into you, and it gives you the longer energy. All right, so what do we got now? We've got a half of a teaspoon, so a teaspoon, not a tablespoon, of baking powder. Now, before I talk about baking powder, let's talk about these. So what I've got right here is a tablespoon, and this is a half teaspoon. So I'd say a lot of people tend to have these measuring things, but if you don't, you have to know these are based on what their name is. So a teaspoon is the type of spoon you use to stir tea, and a tablespoon is the type of spoon that you normally have on a table. So let's see what we've got here. That's the wrong direction. Let's see. So the spoons we've got here look about in the middle of this. So this isn't quite, but I'd say, yeah, this is a little closer to a teaspoon. Now the silverware set I've got at home, actually, we've got teaspoons and we've got tablespoons. And so we can actually use those as the measuring things. But if you have them, you can use your best guess on that. But anyway, we've got a half a teaspoon of baking powder. All right, do you know what baking powder is? So I'm actually going to challenge any adults watching this video. Do you actually know what baking powder is? I'll let you think. All right, so baking powder. So I'll start with, do you know what baking soda is? All right, so you know, if you've watched these videos before, I have used baking soda in quite a few things because it reacts with vinegar and it bubbles. Really, it just reacts with acids and it bubbles up, but it's sodium bicarbonate. So that's sodium with carbon. All right, so that's what baking soda is, but this is baking powder. So do you know what baking powder is? And I actually just recently learned what baking powder actually is, and it is baking soda mixed with cornstarch. That's pretty much what it is. There's a few other things that are going to be in here, like sodium aluminum sulfate and monocalcium phosphate. Mostly those are going to be stabilizers to help keep this shelf stable. But basically, this, if you don't have baking powder, but you do have baking soda, you can just mix baking soda with cornstarch, and that will give you baking powder. I bet a lot of people, even people who bake quite a bit, don't know what baking powder actually is. All right, so that's what it is, but what does it do? All right, so if you know baking powder contains baking soda, you know baking soda likes to bubble, it likes to react to things. So that's kind of what it's going to do in here. It's going to react and it's going to give us some volume in here. Kind of the same way that yeast reacts. Not quite the same because yeast are a living thing. And yeast make a biological reaction, but this is just a chemical reaction. All right, so now we're going to get to the first optional ingredient in here. So far, I wouldn't recommend skipping any of those. The sugar is going to give it sweetness. The baking powder is going to let it rise. And the flour is going to give it the substance. It will also bind it together. And if you didn't put the flour, you really wouldn't have much of anything to eat anyway. But this next one we're going to do is you're going to do 1 small egg or half of a large egg. Most of the eggs you get in a store are probably going to be a large egg. So I think it's kind of a pain to get one cut in half. Now, I'm not going to do this at all, but if you don't want to bother with an egg, there is something else you can do. All right, if you get flax seeds and you grind them up, they can give you a lot of the same type of reasons that you would put an egg in here. So flax seeds you can find all over grocery stores. So that is actually something that a lot of vegans put in their baked goods to not have eggs because it helps it to be like that. So what does an egg actually do? So without my egg in here, this is going to turn into a very dense cake, almost like a brownie. It's going to be sort of like a chocolate lava cake, if you're thinking of the level of how thick it is. Now, if I put cocoa powder in this, then I could actually probably make it a lava cake. But if you do put an egg in it, it's going to be a lot more like a type of cake that you get, like a sheet cake or a birthday cake when you cut. But what an egg does is it's going to expand. So think about when you make something like scrambled eggs, or if you make something like an omelet. If you look really close at it, you can see little bubbles in it. And so next time you have a piece of cake, look at the little bubbles in that cake and how it's kind of spongy. So you could push it down and it'll spring back up. Don't push it down all the way or it's probably just going to stay like that. But if you push it down a little bit, it'll spring back up. So that is partly going to be the baking soda, but part of that is the egg. And the egg is going to give it proteins. And if you watched a couple weeks ago, I talked about how proteins bind things together. So the egg is going to provide those proteins. It's going to be able to give it a spongy texture. So if you add half an egg in here or some flax seeds, ground up flax seeds, then you will get it to be spongy like a regular cake. But if you don't, it's going to be a lot more dense, almost like a brownie or a lava cake. So I'm skipping that one, and that is fine. All right, so then the next optional ingredient is you could add a splash of your milk of choice in here. So whether that is cow milk or goat milk or oat milk or hemp milk or almond milk or soy milk, whatever they are, there's a lot of different options in that. I'm not doing that. I didn't bring that with me today. Now, when I make mug cake at home, actually, this is a thing I really like making. A lot of times I do. Usually we have oat milk, and that's one that I really enjoy making because it's got a good flavor. Coconut milk is actually quite good as well. And so that one is going to add a richness of flavor to it. Dairy is going to kind of round out that flavor, but you don't necessarily have to have it. It's going to give it a milkiness, a creaminess, but you don't necessarily have to have that. So I'm not going to have that in this one. All right, so then we need 2 tablespoons of oil. I'm just using vegetable oil in this. So 1, 2. Great. All right, so what is oil? All right, so I've talked a little bit about oil in the past, and you might know that oil and water don't mix, but oil is going to be really important in this recipe for a few different reasons. So everybody actually needs fats in their diet. So if we weren't adding oil, you could add something like butter, you could add shortening. I don't like margarine at all. I think it's gross, but you could add margarine. That's my personal opinion. That is not a scientific fact. That's my opinion. But you could do that. But oil is a necessary part of people's diets. Now, you might be confused because you probably hear people talking all the time about how fat is bad and things like that. But the funny thing is, actually, of all the foods that we are putting in this that would cause you to gain weight or even to be overweight, the one that's going to contribute to this most is going to be sugar. So fat is something that you definitely don't want too much of, especially something along the lines of the saturated fats, which you are going to get in things like oils and butters and especially things like margarine. But, oh wow, that's really soaking in there now. So fat is something that you do need in your diet. And a big reason for that partly is because fat is where your energy is stored. And so that's where you're if you're burning calories, then usually you're going to be burning fat. Now, it's a little more complicated than that. You could be burning sugars or carbohydrates in your bloodstream, things like that. But if you're going on a long run, you're going to end up burning fat. And it's a little more complicated than that, but I'll leave it at that. So it's something that's necessary for you to have, but is bad for you to have too much of. And believe me, there's definitely a little too much of that in the American diet, but it is something you need to have. But also, why do you think it's in this dessert, and why is it in a lot of our food to begin with? All right, so oils and the fats in those oils actually they play a couple important roles. So one of the reasons why we need to have that isn't just because that's how we store energy. It's because a lot of the processes that happen inside of our bodies, like breaking down and processing vitamins, things like that, have to happen in fats. So there's a word called soluble. So there's water soluble and fat soluble. So water soluble things are things that can break down in water, which is a lot of different vitamins and things like that. But also a lot of vitamins are fat soluble. So if you have zero fat in your diet, you are actually not going to be able to process the nutrients you're eating. It's actually very, very dangerous to not get enough fat in your diet. Now, don't worry if you are eating most meats. There's one exception that's fairly common that's interesting. If you're eating most meats, if you are having oils that you put in foods, if you're eating nuts, things like that, if you're putting butter, don't worry, you're going to be getting enough fats in your diet. The problem with most Americans is not having not enough, but with having too much. Now, there is one exception to animals. So if you are eating animals, most of them are going to be fairly high in fat. But the big exception for that's going to be rabbits. You could actually eat rabbit all day long and you could die of malnutrition because they are so incredibly lean. If the only thing you're eating is rabbits. All right, so that's really important. But why is it in so many recipes? I know I circled back to that one. So that's because fats actually, not only are vitamins fat soluble, but a lot of tastes. It's not quite the same thing, but a lot of tastes, actually you taste things more. So oils taste very good to us. And I've talked about this before, but oils and so fats and sugars and salts were things that in the African savanna where we all originated, they were a lot more rare than other things. So you could find leafy greens, things like that. And so they taste all right to us, but the things that taste best to us are the things that were a lot more rare. So oils tend to be something that are a little bit more rare. So they taste really good to us, but they also enhance the taste of other flavors. They help us to taste them a little bit better. Same thing with our next thing. Now, my recipe didn't call for it, but I think it's a good thing to add. I'm not going to add very much because I don't think you need very much, especially because we have baking powder, which has a little bit of a salty taste, but I'm going to add some salt. I'm going to do maybe a quarter teaspoon. I don't think you need a lot, not for this amount. So salt is another one of those rare nutrients that's something you need in your diet, but a lot of processed foods have way too much of it now. But in this, we're going to be putting a little bit of salt. So salt is one of those things that tastes good, but it also makes things taste better. So you've probably noticed this because you put salt on a lot of things. And it's not just that the salt tastes good, like some other spices, but it actually makes the thing you put it on taste better. And that is backed up by the science too. And you might be thinking, why are we putting something like salt in something sweet? I don't want to have this taste salty, and I understand that. Now, there's definitely a place for things like salted caramels, which I absolutely love. I think they taste delicious. But for this dessert, we're not putting enough salt in it to make it taste salty, but we're putting enough salt in it to make the other flavors stand out. And that's especially important because this is sweet. So salt helps savory things to taste better, but it also especially helps sweet things to taste better. So it enhances the flavor of sweetness. It makes sweet things actually taste sweeter to us. And it also makes bitter things taste less bitter. Salt actually has compounds in it that help to suppress things tasting bitter. So if you've got something that you think tastes bitter, like a bitter green, like something in the broccoli family maybe. I love everything in the broccoli family. It's so good. But if you've got something like Brussels sprouts and you salt them, they'll actually taste a little sweeter and less bitter to you. All right, so there's that. All right, so then we need 2 tablespoons of water. All right. I don't know how much you want me to explain water to you, but I can a little bit. So dihydrogen monoxide is the chemical compound for water. That means it's got 2 hydrogens to an oxygen. Water is obviously something that we need in our diets. All right, so I also want you to notice one of the things that it is labeled on in this package of salt. What do you notice right there? Iodized salt. Now, I'm sure you've seen that before, but you might be wondering what that actually means. So I'm going to tell you it's very important. So iodine is actually an element that we need to have in our diets. It's a necessary nutrient, just like some of the other things that I talked about here and like other vitamins. But the problem is iodine is normally only found or mainly only found in a few things like seafood. So normally it's found in fish and oysters and other types of seafood. But a lot of people aren't going to be eating a lot of seafood, so they're not going to be getting that iodine. Now, this didn't used to be much of a problem for people because most ancient people actually lived right on rivers, and they would have been, or by the ocean, and they would have been able to get that in their diet. You don't need a lot of it, but you do need some. So it was decided that we would add iodine to salt. So it's giving you that nutrient. And this is something that pretty much everybody uses is table salt. Not everybody, but this iodized salt is going to give you your amount of iodine that you need. Now, I do want to warn people because I know there is a trend of using things like rock salt. And if you are using that for your meals, and if you're not getting packaged food, which also has a lot of iodized salt, things like that. So if you completely cut out iodized salt from your diet and you're not eating seafood, you actually might not be getting your amount of iodine that you need. And remember, this is a small amount that you need. Don't go drinking iodine. All right, so now we've got this in here. So then you are going to stir that a little. Then I've got some other optional things. So I'm going to put just a tiny amount of baking vanilla in here. Now remember, this is just a mug cake. So I'm going to put just a couple drops. Hopefully I don't end up spilling this. That's good. That smells good. All right, so I'm adding vanilla because it's what's called an aromatic. That's in the way. So what an aromatic means is that it's got an aroma or a smell. And so we're putting this because while we eat it, you might not know, we normally think of our sense of taste, and then we also think of a sense of smell, but most of your eating experience is actually going to be your sense of smell, not your sense of taste. So your sense of taste is basically just going to be telling you whether something is sweet, sour, bitter, salty, or umami, which means basically savory. But your sense of smell is going to give you the complexities of that. So if you want to prove this to yourself, try plugging your nose and eating something, and you'll notice that you can't really taste it nearly as much. So this is going to add a little bit of complexity to it. All right. Then I'm also going to add some chocolate chips. And we're going to do 2 tablespoons of chocolate chips. Now, if you don't have chocolate chips, that's okay. These are optional. All right, so chocolate chips. Do you know what chocolate is made of? I think it's actually really interesting. And even if you know a little bit, it's probably a lot more interesting than you thought it was. So chocolate is made from cacao beans. And those are these very large bitter pods. And they're basically part of the seed of that. And they get processed and roasted and eventually turned into this. So those are grown in tropical regions, a lot in the rainforest. So as different areas of the rainforest are being lost to things like deforestation, those are actually some of the areas that you'll see being affected is chocolate. And there are actually some people who are saying that we're in danger of losing the range of chocolate. And so you might want to start looking into things like carob, which is a chocolate replacement. But anyway, these are semi-sweet chocolate. So that's going to have to do with how much cocoa powder is actually in these. So what most people watching this probably don't know is that if you look at a bar of chocolate, what it says on there is actually fairly strictly legally defined. So if it is dark chocolate, it has to be a certain percentage of chocolate. If it's milk chocolate, it has to be a smaller percentage of chocolate plus some percentage of milk. Now, if you see a candy bar and it says chocolatey instead of chocolate, then that actually should tip you off that it is not legally enough chocolate in that candy bar to be called chocolate. I just found that out a couple weeks ago and I thought that was very interesting. So that is very true. You can go online and check that if you want to. But a candy bar that says chocolatey, it's because it doesn't have enough cocoa in it. And cocoa is the thing that's made from the cacao beans. So other things that get put in chocolate, the cocoa itself is not sweet. It's got a very rich flavor, a bitter flavor, but when you add sugar, then that's when it becomes sweet like the chocolate we know. But all right, so chocolate is delicious and chocolate actually makes you feel happy. It releases chemicals in your brain that basically trigger joy. And it can also make people more relaxed. All right, so we've got that. Then we're gonna put this in the microwave for 2 minutes. I'm adding just a little bit more in my microwave because our microwave's a little bit older and it doesn't run nearly as well. All right, so hopefully you can still hear me with that going in the background. So, but talking about the chocolate, if you want to know more about any of the foods that you're eating, I would encourage you to look at the back of the label of anything that you're eating and read the ingredients list. So the most important thing to know when you're reading the ingredients list is that they're listed in order of how much is in them. So the first ingredient is going to be the thing with the most in there. So these are semi-sweet. So if they were dark, they would have more cocoa in them. And if they were milk, they would have less. But the first ingredient is sugar. And so there's more sugar than cocoa in chocolate chips. Then it's chocolate. And so chocolate, like I said, it has to be legally defined as a certain amount of cocoa to be in it. So also in that definition of chocolate, there is going to be probably more sugar. So there's sugar, and then there's, again, more sugar and cocoa powder. Then there's milk fat, which is what you do to make something like milk chocolate. So semi-sweet are going to be between dark chocolate and milk chocolate. Then cocoa butter, which is another thing that comes from the cacao bean. Soy, I always forget how to pronounce this, lecithin. So that's a soy byproduct, which if you will look, most processed foods are going to have either corn or soybeans in them. And then natural flavors. All right, so what does natural flavors mean? So natural does not mean what most people think it means. So natural just means that it's not an artificial flavor, so that it's something that can be found in nature. So most things could be natural flavors, and it's actually, there is, if you don't know what a fallacy is a line of reasoning that in itself is not true. There is a fallacy called the naturalistic fallacy. So if you ever want to tout this one out, it's the belief that because something is natural, it's good for you. That's actually not true. So There are a lot of things that are artificial that are bad for you, and you should be wary of a lot of those. But also, you need to know that things like cyanide or hemlock, those are natural things, but it doesn't necessarily mean they're healthy. Now, a company like this is never going to put cyanide or hemlock in their product, but I think it's important there to note these different things. All right, so I wasn't watching this, so hopefully it didn't bubble over. Let's see if it's done. All right, that looks done. So take a look. You can see that I have got a cake in my mug right here. So congratulations, everyone. We have made a cake. And so why did we heat it? I think that's an important question too. So it's undergoing a chemical process where all of the things that we mix together in here with all their different properties I talked about are going to cook, and they're going to provide structure. So if you were to open this up, you can see that this is fairly fluffy. That's a lot to do with the baking powder. It's got a solid structure, and that's provided by the flour. When we taste it, it'll be sweet. I can smell the different aromatic things. I can smell the chocolate. I can smell the vanilla. And then the oil is going to help those flavors to be tasted by us better as well. The water is going to give it a little bit more substance and also help to facilitate those flavors going through. So, all right, we did it. So we have made our cake, and it has gotten the all of these things that have come together. Oh, also the other important thing for the oil, I almost forgot, is that it helps stop the cake from drying out. If we didn't have this oil in here, then this would evaporate water from it much more quickly. All right, so if you want to see what a cake turns out like if you leave out any of this ingredients, that is a nice bonus experiment for you to try. And I think that that is a really fun one. So what you can do is try making this normally and then try it again with taking one of these ingredients out and see what the difference is. All right, so thank you everyone so much for joining me. I hope that I have demonstrated to you today that science is all around us and you don't need to have any type of special training or experience. You can always just appreciate the science that is part of our daily lives. So thank you very much for joining me, and I hope to see you again next time. Bye.